Good evening. I've been asked to begin with a public service announcement. In the unlikely event an emergency should occur, there is an additional emergency exit at the bottom of the stairwell located to my right. I welcome you to our Founders Day Convocation. Please be seated while the university singers perform their opening selection, Oratio Fatime. Thank you, University Singers, Shane Lynch. We celebrate Founders Day and gather for convocation by direction of the Board of Trustees on the birthday of Robert E. Lee, who served as our university's president from 1865 to 1870. Washington and Lee is 268 years old. I have been the president for 3 weeks. It's a privilege to participate for the first time in one of our most important traditions. On this occasion, we reflect upon the people whose vision, leadership, and hard work gave rise to this university, in which we take pride and to which we now devote our own energy. We reflect upon the purposes and the values that abide as the common thread connecting this community across decades and centuries during which so much else has changed. And we reflect upon our motto, non incautus futuri, not unmindful of the future, which expresses our commitment to honor the past, not from a desire to remain frozen in time, but rather as a source of inspiration to direct our own efforts while we are fortunate to be on this campus and on this earth for the benefit of those who will follow us in the decades and centuries to come. Sunday evening, we were graced by the presence of Diane Nash, the legendary civil rights activist, who delivered the keynote address of our celebrations in honor of Martin Luther King. Listening to her, I was struck by the connection between the driving force that propelled the civil rights movement and our own motto here at W&L. She spoke of agape, the ancient Greek word for love of humankind, and said to the young people in the audience who had not yet been born in the 1960s, "Although we did not know you, we loved you." The civil rights activists gave of themselves so that people of my generation and of our students' generation and of future generations could live in a better world. Our university motto calls upon each of us to do the same. Washington and Lee's two most prominent founders, the men for whom our school is named, exemplified this ethos and expressed their conviction in word and in deed that the future is best served by education. 221 years ago, George Washington provided the endowment that ensured the survival of Liberty Hall Academy, enabled its subsequent transformation into a college, and continues to support us today. He declared that the time had come, quote, "when a plan of universal education ought to be adopted in the United States. Not only do the exigencies of public and private life demand it, but if it should ever be apprehended that prejudice would be entertained in one part of the Union against another, an efficacious remedy will be to assemble the youth of every part under such circumstances as will, by the freedom of intercourse and collision of sentiment, give to their minds the direction of truth, philanthropy, and mutual conciliation." Education, Washington emphasized, not only prepares us for personal success and public service, but also, and most importantly, unifies diverse communities of students and teaches them to live in harmony. Robert E. Lee was born 210 years ago, today. Opposed to secession and to the Civil War he knew it would bring, but feeling himself duty-bound to accept Virginia's call to lead its army, Lee will forever be remembered primarily as a Confederate general. But he served twice as long as a college president. 3 years at West Point and 5 years here. And he clearly took more pride in his work as an educator. When Lee arrived in Lexington in the fall of 1865, only months after surrendering at Appomattox, he wrote to his wife, "Life is indeed gliding away, and I have nothing good to show for mine that is past. I pray I may be spared to accomplish something for the benefit of mankind and the honor of God." Lee accepted the presidency of Washington College because it offered him a chance to accomplish something for the benefit of mankind. "So greatly have educational interests been disturbed in the South," he wrote, "and so much does its future condition depend upon the rising generation, that I consider the proper education of its youth one of the most important objects now to be attained." Lee devoted the remaining 5 years of his life to this end. He saved this institution when its existence was threatened, and he proved to be remarkably forward-looking. Lee transformed the college into a small university by expanding the classical curriculum with the addition of modern languages and history, mathematics and natural science, journalism, and law. He built the kind of institution that he wished he had been fortunate enough to attend. As he famously remarked to a faculty member, the great mistake of my life was taking a military education. Washington and Lee is 268 years old. And although its most prominent founders are the two men for whom it is named, our university owes its endurance, its character, and its success to countless other people. Thousands of individuals have contributed in thousands of ways. Some have been celebrated, some have been acknowledged, some have gone unrecognized. Our honored guest and speaker, Jonathan Holloway, will lead us in a reflection on the consequences of making visible the people and the work that have not been granted recognition previously. Jonathan Holloway is the Dean of Yale College and the Edmund S. Morgan Professor of African American Studies, History, and American Studies at Yale University. Dean Holloway is a noted scholar of post-emancipation United States history, social history, and intellectual history. His most recent book is Jim Crow Wisdom: Memory and Identity in Black America Since 1940. In 2009, Dean Holloway won the William Clyde Devane Award for Distinguished Scholarship and Teaching in Yale College. In 2014, he won the Before Columbus Foundation's American Book Award. He's currently a distinguished lecturer for the Organization of American Historians. Dean Holloway completed his bachelor's degree in American Studies at Stanford University, where he was an outside linebacker for the Cardinal football team. He then earned 3 degrees at Yale, including a PhD in history. He's taught at Yale since 1999 and served as the master of Calhoun College from 2005 to 2014. At the end of this academic year, he will become the provost at Northwestern University. Tonight, he will speak on the price of recognition, race, and the making of the modern university. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Holloway.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the applause. Hopefully you'll still applaud after. Yes, I was on the football team. I wasn't expecting that as part of my introduction. I was on the football team. Playing was a different thing. This is a talk about recognition. Let me begin the talk then recognizing those who are about to be honored for their impressive accomplishments. I may have been asked to speak today, but this afternoon really is about their commitment, their intelligence, and their determination. Congratulations to everyone soon to be so recognized. I also want to recognize President Dudley. I met him about 8 months ago when he was merely Will, or more appropriately, Provost Dudley. We met during a dinner at the Provost's house at Yale University. He and other leaders in higher education from around the country were in town for a conference. That conference happened to coincide with the moment that Yale's president announced his decision about the names of 2 new residential colleges that are now nearing completion. That same day, the president also announced his decision about whether to keep the name of one of Yale's extant residential colleges, John C. Calhoun College. This decision followed months of heated exchanges around campus about the propriety of having a residential college at Yale named after someone who was the intellectual architect of Southern secession and who believed that slavery was a positive good blessed by God. The president decided to keep the name of the college in place. The student response was, euphemistically speaking, enthusiastic. In any event, Will and I met that evening. I was quite concerned about how the president's decision would be received and girding myself for another round of campus upheaval. So I can't claim to recall what I said to the group or to Will. Apparently, though, I said something worthwhile during my comments that night, because months later, your incoming president reached out to me as he began to think about his first weeks in office. President-elect Dudley invited me to this convocation, hoping that I might reflect upon the issues that exploded across the nation's college campuses last academic year, and that remain very close to the surface this year as well. I promise all of you that I reminded him that this was his first major event of his presidency, and I invited him to reconsider, thinking that a topic a bit further removed from a political third rail might be more appropriate. He assured me that he was comfortable in the knowledge that some of what I might have to say today might incur a response that is, using the old euphemism again, enthusiastic. All of this is to say, Mr. President, I want to recognize the courage of your convictions and thank you for having me here today on this very important occasion. Also, don't say I didn't warn you. Historians used to be fond of talking about an inevitable sense of progress in human history. You won't find that many historians saying that sort of thing these days. Rather, most of us linger over the ironies of history. Sometimes the ironies are bitter as we watch the country fail to learn from repeated lessons that the past has presented to us. Other ironies are, at least in my mind, humorous. Take, for example, a professor of African American studies, a black man at that, offering a lecture at Washington and Lee University in Lee Chapel, standing in front of a portrait of Robert E. Lee himself. Can you imagine? I am not an art historian and cannot speak of the merits or demerits of the portrait behind me, but I'm able to reference the fact that I've seen a portrait quite similar to this before. About 2 years ago, I was visiting the United States Military Academy, West Point, and one of the civilian historians was excited to take me on an alternative tour of the campus, one different from the run-of-the-mill tours given to countless visitors and prospects. One of the highlights of this particular tour was to see the only portrait of a black man at the Academy. It is important to know that I was there to talk about the role of race in a university setting, and that this particular tour guide was very unhappy with the way that the Academy grounds had become politicized by recent acts of Congress. Ironically enough, representatives voted to name one of the barracks, none of which had names to this point, in honor of Robert E. Lee. This alternative history of West Point, then, was this historian's modest effort at pushing back against what he considered retrograde politics. We entered the library where the portrait was located, turned the corner, and I found myself facing a portrait of Robert E. Lee. I was confused, as last I heard, General Lee was not black. Take a closer look, my tour guide implored me. And then, all of a sudden, I saw it. There, in the distant background, was Lee's horse, Traveler, who was being tended to by a black stable hand. This is a long wind-up to something that is critical to my talk. The unnamed black figure in the portrait was obviously not the person with whom the painting is affiliated, but his unrecognized work was crucial to Traveler's health and well-being, and was thereby interwoven into Lee's own narrative of success. Put another way, the portrait is an unintended metaphor for the ways in which an unrecognized black labor and an unacknowledged black presence are fundamentally part of the nation's history, its institutions, and its triumphant figures. In American Slavery, American Freedom, historian Edmund Morgan argues that one cannot understand the history of the making of the United States without appreciating the fact that the new country's love for freedom was intertwined with its investment in slavery. So much of the American narrative in the intervening centuries has been articulated through an acknowledged and boastful love for freedom, while typically ignoring histories of enslavement, racial segregation, and institutional racism. The textures of the latter phenomena have been no mystery to those who suffer from the experience of being second class. They are accustomed to the fact that so many aspects of their lives have been ignored, sometimes innocently, often willfully. But what happens when that which is typically ignored, in this case the black experience broadly? What happens when that which is typically ignored becomes acknowledged? This talk pauses to reflect on the moment when that which has not been granted recognition is either uncovered or discovered, exploring the world of ideas and its interaction with a social history of black bodies immersed in historically white college cultures invites a sobering assessment about the costs associated with recognition. When we reflect upon blacks' thoughts and examine their experiences, we come to the realization of how high the stakes happen to be in the making of the modern university. Black ideas, for want of a better term, regarding recognition turn almost inevitably toward literal and figurative violence. Part 1, the intellectuals. I am standing puzzled, unable to decide whether the veil is really being lifted or lowered more firmly into place, whether I'm witnessing a revelation or a more efficient blinding. the narrator in Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. Russell Jacoby published The Last Intellectuals, American Culture in the Age of Academe in 1987. The book, a polemic about the failure of a new generation of scholars to replace the famed New York intellectuals of mid-century, seemed encyclopedic as it canvassed the breadth of 20th century American intellectual life. But the book, a clear success in the publishing world and in the world of ideas, the book claimed a false breadth. No black scholars, not even the ubiquitous mid-century troika of Richard Wright, James Baldwin, and Ralph Ellison, appeared in Jacoby's analysis. To his credit, Jacoby acknowledged this oversight in the 2000 edition of the book, writing admiringly about the opportunity and possibilities presented by the intervening mid-1990s emergence of the so-called new black public intellectual. And I quote, "For the first time in many years, a group of African American intellectuals has burst upon the scene. Figures such as Henry Louis Gates, Gerald Early, Adolph Reed Jr., Randall Kennedy, and Cornel West. These are smart, hard-hitting, and often graceful writers who weigh into public problems of race, sports, politics, law, and culture. They have been both acclaimed as successors to the New York intellectuals and criticized as publicity hounds who ignore earlier black public intellectuals such as W.E.B. Du Bois and C.L.R. James. In no way did my book anticipate their appearance. It seems to me that the new black intellectuals demonstrate that a literate, indeed hungry public still exists." In a way, Jacoby was right. For a time in the 1990s, it really did feel like you couldn't turn a corner without running into an essay about these new public intellectuals. But what was it that made them new? If taken literally, the newness can simply be a reflection of the fact that these figures were part of an emerging generation of thinkers who are operating in the public consciousness. But Jacoby's original failure to recognize black scholars working throughout the 20th century and increasingly in white spaces as universities began to desegregate. This failure to recognize these black scholars points to a more troubling reality. For most of the century, black intellectuals' contributions simply didn't register with or matter to a mainstream audience. The failure to recognize black contributions to the world of ideas had consequences. In 1968, Eldridge Cleaver, soon to be Black Panther Party Minister of Information, published Soul on Ice, a disturbing reflection on structural inequality, race, masculinity, violence, physical and psychological, and American culture. Cleaver criticized the, quote, so-called molders of public opinion, the writers, the politicians, and teachers, adding that they were not equipped to either feel or know that a radical break, a revolutionary leap out of their sight had taken place in the secret parts of this nation's soul. For Cleaver, whites' insistent lack of recognition helped contribute to the revolutionary moment gripping the nation and the nation's campuses. Cleaver angrily assessed the risk of willful ignorance, arguing that a commitment neither to see nor to know was a commitment to extermination. The question in Cleaver's black radical mind was simply who was going to be wiped out first due to this commitment to cultural obliteration. Commitment is the operative word here, since it is the systemic determination to refuse to believe in the full breadth of black humanity that has caused so much damage in the black world psychologically, phenomenologically, and literally. This is a point that bears emphasizing because it underscores an abiding theme in black critical discourse, and because for so many black intellectuals, the very act of creating a critical discourse was about survival. Feminist theorists like Audre Lorde made this much plain. And I quote, "For women, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizon of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives." Other scholars and writers have written with similar urgency. For example, in the first of his two essays that comprise The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin tells his nephew, or rather prepares his nephew, for a country that was dedicated to black impossibility. He said, "You, his nephew, you were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity, in as many ways as possible, that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. No one could claim, of course, that Baldwin was unknown on the American scene. He was, in fact, quite the opposite, the darling of talk shows, college debates, artists' salons, and the speaker circuit generally. However, Baldwin's work revolved around his commitment to addressing that which went unacknowledged in the American consciousness. This, in the end, was what he was trying to tell his nephew. The country into which he had been born could not imagine him as a fully formed human being. Ironically, Baldwin's celebrity and resulting hypervisibility allowed an admiring public to ignore the very troubles that Baldwin was pointing them toward. Admiration could feel like an acknowledgement for those bestowing the recognition, but admiration did not do anything to address the structural problems that were part and parcel of an unacknowledged existence in the first place. This caveat is important. The moment of recognition is not inexorably a move toward progress. The failure to recognize blacks as fully human or to understand their complexity had mortal consequences. Journalist and cultural critic Ta-Nehisi Coates has delineated how the failure to recognize the full measure of blacks' humanity manifested itself in a cultural consciousness that reduced blacks to ciphers of impossibility. In his book, Between the World and Me, Coates borrows explicitly from Baldwin's structure in The Fire Next Time and writes a letter to his son that is suffused with a moral and mortal urgency that is linked directly to the murder of one of his Howard University classmates and to Coates, someone who was the physical embodiment of black possibility. Between the World and Me is a simultaneous canvassing of American history and the contemporary moment. Collectively, the past and present are intertwined in often brutalizing and heartbreaking ways, both in service, Coates claims, to a logic of structural domination. In one of the more poignant passages, Coates connects the nation's logic of economic exploitation to its joint refusal to believe in an enslaved person's humanity. And I quote, "The wisdom is not unique to our people, but I think it has special meaning to those of us born out of mass rape, whose ancestors were carried off and divided into policies and stocks. I have raised you," he's talking to his son, "I have raised you to respect every human being as singular, and you must extend that same respect into the past. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. It is a particular specific enslaved woman whose mind is active as your own, whose range of feeling is as vast as your own, who prefers the way the light falls in one particular spot in the woods, who enjoys fishing where the water eddies in a nearby stream, who loves her mother in her own complicated way, thinks her sister talks too loud, has a favorite cousin, a favorite season, who excels at dressmaking and knows inside herself that she is as intelligent and capable as anyone." In a different way, Claudia Rankine identified the same phenomenon in Citizen, an American lyric. Using prose, images, and poetry, Rankine captured the same moral rage we find in Coates. Here, though, there is more nuanced language that also speaks to a sorrowful mixture of resignation and resilience. Rankine understands that the battle is long and that knowing one's enemies can often mean knowing one's friends, and knowing one's friends means knowing their blindness. She writes, "You are in the dark, in the car, watching the black tarred street being swallowed by speed. He tells you his dean is making him hire a person of color when there are so many great writers out there." Ralph Ellison prefaced Coates and Rankine. In The World in the Jug, Ellison took umbrage with New York intellectual Irving Howe for his inability or his unwillingness to believe that there might be more than one type of Negro writer. His words, "Blacks had a broad and complicated humanity that was no different than any other person, but Howe could not see it and criticized Ellison and Baldwin for failing to follow in Richard Wright's footsteps and write what was called protest literature. Ellison unleashed his anger. I did not intend to take the stance of the knowing Negro writer against the presuming white intellectual. While I am without a doubt a Negro and a writer, I am also an American writer. And while I am more knowing than Howe, where my own life and its influences are concerned, I took the time to question his presumptions as one responsible for contributing as much as he is capable to the clear perception of American social reality. For to think unclearly about that last segment of reality in which I find my existence is to do myself violence. To allow others to go unchallenged where they distort that reality is to participate not only in that distortion, but to accept, as in this instance, a violence inflicted upon the art of criticism. Cleaver, Lord, Baldwin, Coates, Rankin, Ellison, the list goes on and the observations compound upon one another. The chronology feels immaterial. Ideas contort with structural realities that terminate almost inevitably with violence. Language deflates and compels its authors to more hard work as it falls upon ears that will not hear or eyes that refuse to see. This work in pain, both grounded in invisibility, that is, in truth, the failure to recognize someone as fully human, and both related to the psychological violence that springs from the fact that Black ideas can be so easily dismissed. This work in pain is not unique to the Black scholar and the professional maker of ideas. This work in pain are also an abiding theme among Black undergraduates at historically white colleges and universities since they began to arrive on these campuses in any numbers suggesting a critical mass in the late 1960s. Part 2, students. Live with your head in the lion's mouth. I want you to overcome them with yeses, undermine them with grins, agree them to death and distraction. Let them swallow you till they vomit or bust wide open. The narrator's grandfather, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Before he graduated from Yale in 1968, Armstead Robinson sat for an interview with the Yale Alumni Magazine about his experiences of being Black at Yale. Robinson sounded notes of dissatisfaction and anger when he spoke about the whiteness of a place like Yale and the absence of Black history in the school's curriculum. However, when he addressed the foundational meaning of being Black at Yale, Robinson sounded wise and weary beyond his years. He spoke to the role of the Black individual in a virtually all-white setting and the determination to preserve a set of memories and culture that would otherwise succumb to neglect or erasure. Robinson began with a question. The basic issue here is why were we brought to Yale in the first place? He continues, I will argue that somewhere deep in the minds of the people on the admissions committee was the idea that they needed some diversity. It's sort of like when you're cooking, you throw in some salt to make the food taste better. It's a fundamentally paternalistic conception to assume that the functional utility for bringing Black people here is to use them to broaden the horizons of the white students. It almost seems as if Yale said, let's get some Indians, a few Negroes, keep the number small, but have a few as spicing so you can have the whole pot taste good. I can't handle that. Not very many Black people can handle it either. Robinson wanted to make it clear to the magazine's readers that his was not a defeatist attitude. He argued that Black students had more to contribute to Yale than simply serving as ethnographic artifacts that would help whites feel better. Or as he put it, we refuse to be the spicing. Robinson continued, we think there's much more to Blackness than simply to make whiteness a little gray. We think that Blackness in and of itself is good. We refuse to come here and lose our Blackness by sort of helping out the white majority. In a sense, that would be asking a Black student to come here and become deculturated. That's a hell of a process. And it's not something you ask anybody else to do. The desire for positive Black identification is, quite frankly, a positive assertion that I have some identity that I intend to preserve. I'm not running away saying that I can't deal with it. It's just that if you don't ask anybody else to do it, then don't ask me to do it. Robinson's insights reflect the psychological trauma of deculturation, of being told in many ways that his and his peers' ideas weren't necessary or relevant. Their bodies, however, were required. This was the late 1960s, and Robinson's ideas were a manifestation of the presence let loose when many of the leading historically white colleges and universities started to open their doors to Black students. Administrators began to concede that they had been ignoring Black students and became determined to address this particular failing. Most dramatically, admissions officers moved hastily to reach into the nation's urban enclaves, hoping to identify Black students who could manage the academic challenges of the traditional, rigorous liberal arts curriculum. Being on campus in still relatively small numbers made the Black undergraduates hypervisible. If administrators expected that their most physically identifiable students would uniformly align themselves with their white peers and with a long-standing curriculum that revolved around the Western European canon, they were mistaken. Across the country, black students, awakened in part by the increased public profile, read mainstream recognition, of black militants like Eldridge Cleaver, began to push aggressively for a curriculum that reflected in part their own lived experience. In short order, calls for black studies began to be made across the nation, beginning at San Francisco State and carrying over to Cornell, Yale, and Harvard in short order. For administrators who were paying attention, recognition meant institutional change. In 1975, poet and activist June Jordan was teaching at Yale. That spring, students invited her to speak at a rally protesting a talk that Stanford scientist William Shockley was giving the next day. Shockley was making the college rounds calling for the sterilization of black women because of what he claimed to be blacks' genetic inferiority. Jordan was, in her words, buoyant and looking forward to reading a poem and making a statement when Teresa Johnson, one of her students, approached her. June Jordan says, she peered into my sunglasses awkwardly for a moment. Then she said, "Why do they hate us, June?" "Why?" she asked me. "Why do they hate me?" I looked at the face of Teresa, at the tears on her face, and something inside me changed irrevocably. I had conceptualized my statement as a written party to a malevolent but intellectual debate, but now I viewed it as part of a very dirty fight, which was by its nature apocalyptic. We could not afford to lose. Robinson and Jordan were writing, and Teresa Johnson was speaking during an era unique unto itself. Colleges were opening their doors more widely than before. The nation was trying to come to terms with shocking rituals of violence in international theaters of war, as well as on the nation's streets, and battles over what was defensible in the world of ideas were being waged. This was a moment that could not be repeated. Or could it? In 2015, citizens across the country watched, most in confusion, but many with a sympathetic awareness, as colleges and universities endured convulsions that seemed to be an echo from decades past. Black student radicals and their allies rose up at major public institutions like the University of Missouri, Mizzou, small liberal arts schools like Amherst and Oberlin, and elite private universities like Yale and Princeton. All told, activists at over 80 schools spoke with a pain and anger that sounded achingly similar to Robinson's angry lament from 45 years earlier, in which he questioned the university's motivation for recognizing blacks as potential students. Jonathan Butler's actions and words are a case in point. Butler, a graduate student at Mizzou, rose to national prominence when he started a hunger strike to protest a range of issues, most significantly, an administrative failure to acknowledge and address a hostile campus climate for black students. In a letter to Mizzou Chancellor Bowen Lofton, Butler acknowledged the fact that the university leadership was finally taking some positive steps aimed at calming the roiling campus, but criticized the administration for talking about new programs as if the administration was acting on its own accord in the absence of earlier calls for change. Butler presented a genealogy of black student activism at Mizzou that reached back to the 1930s, became amplified during the late 1960s, and then reemerged with force in recent years. The administration's failure to recognize this history of black student struggle had contributed to the problems of the moment. Butler continued, "Your language that attempts to adopt strategies like diversity and inclusion training as new strategies without acknowledging where the ideas strategies came from is disrespectful and false. These issues and the strategies that brave individuals have brought to the attention of administrators is not new to MU and also not new to you and your staff specifically. So to not acknowledge the protesters, organizers, students, faculty, and staff who have taken of their time and energy to hold you and your administration accountable is very disrespectful and paints a false image of the work that your administration has been doing on this campus." Butler's letter was a call for recognition and expressed the concern that the administration would not act in good faith when it came to people from marginalized backgrounds and who had existed beyond the scrim. Butler wrote, "These unheard stories are worth your time and attention. Their lived experiences are worth acknowledging and their humanity worth fighting for. This constant lack of acknowledgement to the struggles of oppressed individuals reinforces the notion that administrators only react to incidents on campus that happen to people in organizations or positions of social power." Black students at Oberlin had similar criticisms of their school's administration. The demands that students presented included a call for a more diverse faculty and changes to their curriculum, fairly standard demands across campuses in 2015 and 2016. But their demands also went so far as to name individuals who should either be punished or promoted. The language in the demands opening paragraph almost perfectly reflects Robinson's late 1960s observations and also addresses the crisis that springs from an abiding failure to recognize all of the school's students. While the activists observed that Oberlin was perhaps the most progressive historically white college in the country in terms of its historical commitment to enrolling and supporting Black students, they declared that these claims to an enlightened past were little more than a, quote, public relations campaign initiated to benefit the institution and not the Africana people it was set out for. Oberlin relied on Black and brown students for its publicity brochures, but then erased them from day-to-day life on campus. I quote, "You profit off of our accomplishments and invisible labor, yet you expect us to produce personal solutions to institutional incompetencies. We, as a college-defined, high-risk, low-income, disadvantaged community, should not have to carry the burden of deconstructing the white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist system that we took no part in creating. It is so deeply embedded in the soil upon which this institution was built." At Amherst, student organizer Mercedes McAlpine spoke directly to the connection between the campus unrest and a sense among students that their experiences simply weren't recognized by the institution. She said, "The turning point and why it got so large is that multiple students of all sorts of background recognized a feeling of feeling marginalized, of feeling invisible, of feeling isolated in some important way." One event at Yale reaffirmed the historic phenomenon of a failure of acknowledgement and then the corresponding student anger and resentment when, in the students' minds, the university administration continued to use the students of color as window dressing and refused to address deeper structural issues relating to quality of life and the curriculum. Roughly 1 week into a tense month of standoffs between the students and the administration, the Yale students held a march for resilience. It was a transcendent moment when Yaleys of all backgrounds and ranks, from undergrads to grad students to faculty, when they all came together to support one another, specifically women of color, who had been feeling the brunt of so much antipathy in the national press over their activism. The march was led by women holding a banner. That banner declared, "We out here, we been here, we ain't leaving, we are loved." That banner and the accompanying chant were an insistence that ignoring students and their experiences was no longer a viable strategy that an ethical college administration could pursue, that people needed to know their history if they hoped to have a purchase on their future, and that if the university could not find a way to support and love its own students, then the students would do it themselves. This march may have been one calling for resilience, but it was clearly also a march about recognition. Part 3, conclusion. Near the end of his life, James Baldwin declared, "The day will come when you will trust you more than you do now, and you will trust me more than you do now, and we can trust each other. I really do believe in the New Jerusalem. I really do believe that we can all become better than we are. I know we can. But the price is enormous, and people are not yet willing to pay it." Baldwin was speaking about the price of the ticket, an investment that everyone, Black, brown, and white, needed to make in order to secure a just world. Whether he was writing to his nephew in the fire next time or to a broader readership in his other essays, novels, or plays, Baldwin was always wrestling with the high price of that ticket and encouraging people to rise to the many challenges that got in the way of meeting that expense. As our colleges and universities continue to pursue aspirations of supporting demographic complexity and inclusion, they would do well to listen to the histories of their own faculties and students. Recognizing those who are already members of their communities, learning their stories, and valuing their contributions will go a long way toward meeting the price of that ticket. At minimum, just a sincere acknowledgement of the full and complex humanity that makes up our nation's campuses would be a down payment worth making. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your thought-provoking and illuminating remarks, which remarkably bring together your intellectual career and your courageous work at Yale. Founders Day is also a time for us to recognize several individuals for fulfilling the ideals of leadership and service. We do so by inducting them into Omicron Delta Kappa, the National Leadership Honor Society. I learned from my father for the first time this weekend that he was inducted into ODK 50 years ago at the University of Virginia. Katrina Kiki Spezio is the president of the Alpha Circle of ODK. She's a senior from Taunton, Massachusetts, majoring in politics and minoring in poverty studies. In addition to serving as president of ODK, Kiki is a Bonner Scholar, logging over 2,300 service hours over the course of her W&L career, and she's one of 3 Owings Fellows in this academic year who engage with high school students around the country in promoting academic integrity and honor systems. Along the way, Kiki has also found time to coordinate Neighbors Alternative Break trips and 3 volunteer venture programs, and to serve on the University Registration and Class Schedules Committee and the Student Financial Aid Committee. She's served as a Writing Center tutor, a lab technology specialist in the Center for Global Learning, a member of the Repertory Dance Company, and a member of the junior advisory group that helped to plan last year's Women's Leadership Summit. Kiki was the recipient of a Gilman Scholarship, which afforded her the opportunity to study in her native country of China, and a Schlegel Scholarship through which she attended the 2016 Student Conference on U.S. Affairs at West Point. She's been a Shepherd intern twice, working to increase arts access in Brooklyn and managing an English immersion summer camp for Haitian migrant children in the Dominican Republic. This past summer, Kiki completed a Public Policy and International Affairs Fellowship at the Woodrow Wilson School, where she hopes to return for graduate school after pursuing a fellowship in a field of social impact. I did not have a resume like that when I was 21 years old. Please join me in welcoming Kiki Spezio.
Thank you, President Dudley, for your kind introduction. I would also like to welcome our distinguished guests, students, families, and friends as we gather to celebrate the extraordinary accomplishments of our new initiates and anticipate their continued excellence in leadership, both here at Washington and Lee and in communities across the world. As President Dudley has already noted, this week at Washington and Lee, we celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On Monday, as a National Day of Service, Americans from all walks of life engaged in service that hosts the potential to empower individuals, strengthen communities, bridge barriers, create solutions to social problems, and move us closer to Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. This year, we celebrated how far our beloved community has come with Lexington's first Martin Luther King Jr. Day Community Parade. Dr. King stands as one of the most passionate and impactful leaders our nation has ever seen. Earlier this week, we were also honored to hear from civil rights leader Diane Nash, reminding each of us that we have the personal power to make a difference. It is fitting then that we celebrate the leadership of students, faculty, alumni, and community members who have devoted themselves to leading and serving their communities and our nation. This year at Washington and Lee, our recognition of Founders Day coincides with the birthday of another leader, Robert E. Lee. Former President Rousseau has said that this event reminds us of Lee's most enduring legacy, a particular kind of leadership, one with integrity, honor, and service to others as defining characteristics. And today's celebration offers an opportunity to reflect on this particular type of leadership embodied in the lives of these great leaders. Just over a century ago, a select group of 15 Washington and Lee student and faculty leaders founded Omicron Delta Kappa to bring together leaders involved in the various spheres of college activities for the general good of the institution. Since its founding, the Society has sought to honor those students, faculty, alumni, and community members who best demonstrate exemplary leadership, in the words of George Washington, to impress upon the mind of every man, from the first to the lowest, the importance of the cause and what it is they are contending for. As the Alpha Circle of ODK, we recognize those with deep-seated commitment to continued active participation in the W&L community strong spiritual and moral character, and service to the campus, community, and the world. We are confident that our initiates will continue to demonstrate outstanding leadership in the 5 areas recognized by the Society: scholarship, athletics, service, journalism, and the arts. Many of our initiates excel in more than one of these fields, while others represent incredible depth within a single sphere. Leadership can take many forms in many areas of service, and often the greatest acts of leadership do not appear on a resume. All of our initiates today lead in formal, countable ways, but they also lead simply by living well in their own spheres of influence. They take seriously their impacts on those around them. I believe they will continue in the tradition with our founders and improve the world around us by serving others through honorable, original, and moral leadership. I am humbled by the previous accomplishments and future potential of my fellow students honored here today. We will now recognize each of our initiates and invite them to the stage for the traditional tapping ceremony. I will begin today with our honorary initiates. I will call each to the stage individually, and I ask that you hold your applause until all have been introduced. Judy L. Castile serves as the Executive Director of Project Horizon, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing domestic, dating, and sexual violence in Lexington. Castile is a summa cum laude graduate of Bluefield College and has worked in the field of violence against women for nearly 30 years. She has been recognized by the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services, by the International Association of Forensic Nurses Advocacy Award, and by Virginia Tech, who named her Community Woman of the Year. She is a past chair of the governing body of the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, which honored her with a Nexus Catalyst Award for her work with law enforcement. She was named one of the top 30 voices of people who made an impact in the field of violence against women in Virginia. Governor McAuliffe appointed her to the State Task Force on Combating Campus Sexual Assault, and she has served as president of the Rockbridge Area Community Services Board. She belongs to Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Lexington, where she serves on the church council and chairs the social ministry committee. Eugene Michael McCabe is an associate professor of physical education and head men's lacrosse coach at Washington and Lee. In his 11th season as the head coach, he has posted a 119-61 overall record and won a pair of ODAC titles and 3 trips to the NCAA tournament. His overall coaching record is 173-79. He graduated from Bates College with a bachelor's degree in European history, earned certification to teach secondary education, and lettered in lacrosse and football. While head coach at Hamilton College, he was named the USILA National Coach of the Year. At Washington and Lee, McCabe was previously an assistant football and lacrosse coach and was elected to the University Board of Appeals and the Student Affairs Committee. He has worked with bystander education as an instructor and promotes awareness of it. McCabe is a board member of Lacrosse the Nations, a foundation that provides physical education and life mentoring skills to disadvantaged children. In 2016, he led WNL students on a service trip with this group to Nicaragua. McCabe is also on the board of Limekiln Theater in Lexington and is the vice president of the United States Intercollegiate Lacrosse Association. He and his wife have 4 daughters, including one in the class of 2021. Joan Marie Shaughnessy is the Roger D. Group Professor of Law and a core faculty member of the Shepherd Program. She joined the faculty of the School of Law in 1983, and she received her BA from the State University of New York at Binghamton and her JD from the University of Chicago, where she was inducted into the Order of the Coif. She teaches and writes in the areas of federal procedure and child maltreatment. She has been a visiting professor at Washington University School of Law, Washington College of Law at American University, and Brooklyn Law School. Shaughnessy has served the law school and the university in a wide range of capacities, including on the Co-Education Task Force Committee on Security and as Associate Dean in the law school. She chairs the University Faculty Review Committee and the School of Law Admissions Committee. She is a member of the President's Advisory Committee and the University Board of Appeals. She has been a member and chair of the Lexington Planning Commission and of the Board of Rockbridge Area Hospice. And she provides legal assistance to victims of domestic violence through Sanctuary for Families, based in New York, where she is a member of the bar. Kevin A. Struthers is responsible for the artistic programming and day-to-day direction of jazz programs at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., in collaboration with the artistic director for jazz. This responsibility includes over 50 annual subscription series concert presentations and Kennedy Center produced performances, the Kennedy Center Jazz Club, the Mary Lou Williams Jazz Festival, and the Betty Carter's Jazz Ahead International Career Development Residency. Highlights of his Kennedy Center tenure include the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters Tribute Concert of 2016, the creation of the interdisciplinary Jason Plus series showcasing jazz pianist Jason Moran with artists and companies of varied genres, the Blue Note at 75 celebration of the iconic record label's Diamond Anniversary, the Jazz in Our Time Living Jazz Legends Award Ceremony and Concert honoring over 30 international jazz icons, and concerts marking the career and birthdays of James Moody, Ella Fitzgerald, Billy Taylor, Jimmy Heath, and Benny Golson, the production of several CDs of Kennedy Center performances, the recording, broadcasts, and streaming of multiple programs on NPR, and the implementation of international public diplomacy jazz ambassador tours with the U.S. Department of State. Struthers holds an MA in Arts Management from the American University and a BA in Music from Washington and Lee. He resides with his wife, also a W&L graduate, and their sons in West Virginia. Let us congratulate them as they return to their seats. Now we will move to our senior class initiates. Azmine Amin. Andrew Jacob George Blocker. Jeffrey Jake Burnett. Thomas Bryant Kane. John Mayer Crum. Kinsey Reagan Grant. Batsheva Honig. Conley Karlovic Hurst. Daniel Coleman Johnson. Laura Elizabeth Levette. Courtney Jennifer McCauley. Kristen Angel Sharman. Zachary Joseph Taylor. Alakia Tenali. Anna Caroline Todd. Kaylee Wells. Let us congratulate them as they return to their seats. Next, we will move to our junior class initiates. Raymond Emery Cox, who is unable to be with us today. Dana Purser Gary. Thomas Mason Greist. Ralston Carter Hartness. Cassie Ann Scott. Thomas Hart Thetford. Angel Francisco Vela de la Garza Evia. Let us congratulate them as they return to their seats. Finally, we'll move on to our law school initiates. Anne Marie Anderson. Peter Martin Sarametta. Annie Cox Tripp. Arthur Ross Verbroek. Elizabeth Randall Williams. Peter Scott Askin. Christopher Clayton Brewer. Matthew C. Donahue. Kendall Pierce Manning. Jonathan Andrew Murphy. Benjamin Stewart Nye. Nicholas Alexander Ramos. Alex Meyer Sirota. Catherine Page Thomas. Peter Chartland Thomas. Catherine Elizabeth Woodcock. Let us congratulate them as they return to their seats. I wish to offer a final congratulations to all of our ODK honorary and student initiates. Thank you all again for everything you do for Washington and Lee and for our world.
Thank you, Kiki. On behalf of the Washington and Lee community, I offer warmest congratulations to all the new initiates who exemplify the ODK ideals of leadership through service, obligation to others, and individual sacrifice. To our new student initiates, I encourage you to reflect upon the accomplishments of the 4 honorary initiates: Judy L. Castile, Eugene Michael McCabe, Joan Marie Sean Shaughnessy, and Kevin A. Struthers. Take inspiration from them and set your sights high. We will be watching as you continue to grow as university leaders, as well as leaders in your professions and your communities in the years to come. Now please stand as the chamber singers perform the Washington and Lee hymn. We will be adjourned upon its completion. Thank you all very much.
You must show.